Welcome to Becoming, where sex and intimacy meets self-awareness. Together, we're going to dive into a journey of shame, emotional trauma, self-awareness, shame around sex, as well as eroticism. As a sex, relationship, and intimacy coach, I really look forward to sharing insight, wisdom, and techniques for a more awakened you. So, there's no way to go into this episode of Becoming without sharing a little bit of why I'm starting this journey here. So, why Becoming? How does an Indian woman socialized in a very conservative upbringing land in this profession? How does somebody who has been told to cover up most of their life or to shy away from anything around conversations around sex land in this industry? Well, for me, very much like many other human beings, my journey is a transformative one. And it's one where I vowed to help myself first. And from that place, once I knew that I had arrived within myself, that I would then pay it forward and help others. And that's exactly what has happened. So the story of becoming is truly about becoming one with myself and allowing myself to have sexual freedom and liberation. So it's a play on the word becoming, Becoming, to become, and the word becoming, Becumming, the way that I'm spelling it, is very much a play on the word come, which is often the excretion that comes out after orgasm. So this is blending self-awareness with sensuality and sexuality. And I've had a lot of pushback, to be honest, about this name because there is so much shame and stigma, even today in the world that we're living in, around the word sex or anything to do with orgasm and come. I've had pushback from friends. I've had pushback from family. I've had pushback from colleagues, really saying that it's a little bit too much and too out there. But that's exactly the point. I've lived a life that has had to have so much secrecy and so much shame around the concept of sex. So I say, this is a journey of me helping myself and helping others. And it was the truth that I'm no longer going to hide. And I absolutely believe that it's possible to blend spirituality and sexuality. I think they marry together, one and the same. Many people feel that they are two separate ends of the spectrum there, completely separate ends of the spectrum. But personally, as I've learned to be with myself, my whole self, I cannot exclude that part of me, even as a spiritual being. So the journey of becoming for me began at the age of 34, where I found myself extremely disconnected. And when I say extremely disconnected, consider somebody who is walking around the planet like a walking zombie, maybe something like you've seen on The Walking Dead. These zombie-like states that people who are dead are walking around the planet in. That was me. The age of 34, I found myself so utterly and completely disconnected from my emotions, from my identity, from my beliefs, from pleasure, from sex, from my body. I found myself disconnected from reality. I found myself disconnected from everything that you can consider in existence. My reality at that point in my life was suicidal, life or death. And in fact, after 3 unsuccessful attempts, there was a point where I chose life and I chose myself. So, what exactly had me so disconnected, so disconnected from life and myself. I think it was a lifetime of unresolved trauma from childhood to young adulthood to my current state in marriage that was unvoiced, that was silenced, that was often even unrecognized. I was a trauma survivor who really didn't even identify as somebody who experienced trauma. And the trauma that I'm talking about is quite large. So, trigger warning here. This is very much the journey of complex PTSD, which is trauma that happened in the context of another person over a long period of time. It was relational trauma that I did not even count as trauma. I literally just thought, well, that was my life. And that's what you do. I came from a culture that you don't really talk about these things. And in fact, you protect patriarchal systems at all expenses. It's almost like the woman in submission is to take whatever comes. And I learned that generationally from aunts, from perhaps my own mother, from cousins, from aunts who continued to walk that path of supporting the patriarchal system of protection. So I'll rewind back here. So at the age of 34, I used to shower in the dark. Why would I shower in the dark? Completely afraid of my own naked body. Not just repulsed or a little bit off put, afraid, if you can imagine. What is it like to be in a human body and to be afraid of your own human body? And I was showering in the dark because then I didn't have to see myself. And it's almost like a maladaptive coping mechanism, a defense mechanism almost, of then not needing to even remember that I have a body. So my brilliance was, well, how can I get away with that? Well, you shower in the dark. And I showered in the dark for probably 6 or 7 months when I really became fearful. And it was a way for me to even further disconnect from the body that I had. And the thing that had got me there was I was in a completely sexless, touchless, touch-starved marriage. And that was not something that I knew that I was going to be signing up for. And the impact of that became very detrimental for me. And the truth is that I really loved my husband and my husband at the time, and he genuinely loved me. We had the sweetest courtship. I mean, talk about romance. I lived in California, he lived here in Dallas, and I'm telling you, we saw each other weekly. He found a way for us to connect, whether him flying to Dallas or me, or sorry, him flying to Los Angeles or me flying to Dallas kind of on the weekly so that we could share time and space together. And we had the most beautiful romance and the most beautiful connection of friendship and sharing experiences. And I felt so completely adored by this man in my life. And when we were dating, there was not a lot of physical intimacy. And it was told to me out of respect for me. And for me, that was like such a whole new shift in paradigm of, wow, this man is really in love with me. And he genuinely doesn't want to engage in physical intimacy until we get married. And I completely respected that, utterly respected that. In fact, it truly made me feel maybe perhaps a bit more adored or a bit more special. Like, wow, who does that? What man in this day and age wants to cherish and worship a connection that much that they want to wait until marriage? And so I consented to that. Of course we can wait until after we're married. And we did. And honestly, I so appreciated the adoration that I received from him in other ways. The sweetness of our connection. I mean, I could be driving anywhere, whether it was in Los Angeles or here in Dallas, and if there was traffic, he was my real life Apple map, my real life Google map on the phone, navigating what turn to take, the best way to get home, how to avoid traffic. Genuine sweetness, genuine adoration. And so, we fast forward and get married. And of course, on our wedding night, like, I'm excited to explore sexually. And I was met with a ton of, at that point in time, felt utter, for me, it felt like rejection of kind of being pushed off of him or, um, yeah, being told that he didn't quite feel like it. And immediately on that night, something in my gut sank and something in my whole being and body knew that there was something off, that something wasn't quite right. But I didn't have the guts. I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have the know-how of how do you even bring this conversation up, especially around a topic when in my culture, you just don't talk about it. Okay, so night 1, I let that go. Night 2, I try again, thinking I'm all sexy and beautiful and this, that, and the other. I try again, and same thing. I was kind of like picked up and pushed to the side, and same feeling came inside of me of, hmm, something's off here. Well, the story from that night on was, okay, I'm not gonna try and I'm not gonna try again. And in fact, I realized and I had said to myself, this is the man that I married and I love him. And I love him. And that means something to me. And this is the choice that I made. And if this is the path that we walk on together, then I accept it. So that's the story that I told myself, martyrdom, right? Putting my needs aside at the expense of myself, taking on whatever it was with him, and we never really talked about it again. So 1 year goes by, no touch, no hand. We would hold hands in the car and things like that, and that was pretty much the extent of our physical intimacy. He had never seen me naked. I had not seen him naked. And something inside of me slowly started to truly die inside. I shut down all the parts of me that were sensual, all the parts of me that were sexual, all the parts of me that wanted to experience pleasure or connection with my partner. Literally shut it down. And the shutting down wasn't just the shutting down of sexual self, it began the shutting down of my heart. It began the shutting down of the who am I. It began the shutting down of my experience with my culture. It became the shutting down of joy and with life inside of me. So 1 year goes by, and then year 2 goes by, and it's our second anniversary. And so I buy lingerie thinking, okay, let me try looking sexy. And same thing. I was pretty much met with a lot of picking me up off of him if I tried to engage and pushing me to the side. And I also remember that sinking feeling of, wow, this just really is not ever going to happen. Now, that also started for me to shut down another thing from me. I internally started to mourn the children that I knew that I would never have when I stayed in this marriage. If I stayed in this marriage, I knew I would never have the opportunity to have children because if you're not engaging sexually, well, it's the basics of the birds and bees. How are you going to have children? So I internally started to grieve the loss of kids without knowing that that's what I was doing. And that started to take a toll on me and my life and my body and my essence and my being. Second year of marriage, a little bit of a backtrack here, but my career was I was a special education teacher. And here in Dallas, I worked at a school. I was let go because of funding for that particular program. And I went into business for myself, where I was going to start the school program for kids. And I sure did. I went on to go ahead and build out a program for children with special needs, and it became one of those heart soul projects that really fed the pain that I was carrying inside. And the story that I started to create within myself was, okay, Priya, you're never going to have kids of your own in this particular marriage. This is the man that you've chosen to be with. You love him. You're going to stay. And I decided, well, I will love other people's children wholeheartedly, passionately, and I will love them as if they're my own. And went on to co create a school program here in Dallas for children with special needs. And quite honestly, my ex husband was a huge supporter in that. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had his financial support to have done it. And it became one of those things that I threw myself into wholeheartedly and passionately. And I absolutely know today that if I hadn't have had that to have turned to, there's no way I would be here in existence at all. The pain that I was carrying inside was so deep and so raw that they were very healing for me. It was a place where I could get cuddles and hugs and touch, obviously in a very loving, innocent way, but touch is touch is touch is touch. And if it's a hug from a kid, if it's a smile and eye contact with another human being, it was more than I was getting in my own relational dynamic. And so I went on to throw myself into that. Well, year 2 became year 3, and I began to shut down even further. And it's really hard to describe the different levels and layers of shutdown that happen when you're experiencing trauma in this form. And yes, non-sexual, it's called sexual neglect. It's a form of trauma. It's not one that's really talked about very often. It's not one that's really spoken so freely and openly about, but it is a trauma in itself. Year 3, something shifted in him, and this was, like I say, trigger warning. I was approached, but with clothes on. So it took 3 years, clothes on, and it felt devastating for me. I remember my body just clenching and freezing up and kind of being um, frozen. They say fight, flight, freeze response. I was frozen. And I would kind of like let that play out because I wanted to see what the heck that was. And playing that out became even bigger Pandora's box. Even bigger as Pandora's box. Because one of the things that I had shut down in my life experience was 10 years of childhood sexual abuse. And something about my ex-husband getting on top of me with clothes on to engage in this sensual, sexual way totally became a catalyst for 10 years of suppressed sexual abuse that I had shoved away. And not pretended didn't exist. I just simply wrote it off that it didn't exist because I don't know why, to be honest. I think that's just trauma, and a trauma survivor of people who often just go through childhood trauma like that. You often just count it as this is just my life. So here, right in front of my face, year 3 is the truth of a sexless marriage happening, but also the awakening and flashbacks now, which flashbacks, if anybody knows anything about that, they're hell on earth to have these memories of experiences come to you that like you have no recollection of, but knowing that these things happened. So he became a catalyst and a trigger for me to really start to look at my life. And I confronted him about it, saying, I'm not comfortable with that. And like, why aren't we doing the real thing? It took me 3 years to be able to say, why aren't we having sex? What the heck is going on? I don't understand. Do you not find me? Listen to all of the stories and questions I had created. I'm not attractive. It's my body. I um I'm too broad or too masculine looking. And most people would consider me quote unquote pretty feminine looking, but I thought, okay, my shoulders are too big. Maybe my breasts are too big. Maybe my waist isn't small enough. And I literally then became obsessed. I mean, obsessed for the quest for the perfect body. And it became something I could control. I couldn't control what was happening in my home environment. I couldn't control what was happening in my internal environment. So I became obsessed with controlling food. I can control what I eat, when I eat, how much I eat, how little I eat, almost to the point of obsession and almost to the point of harm. I would actually take out the word almost. Yeah, to the place of harm. And that became a whole new trauma in itself of learning down the line how to heal from control and binge and neglect of myself. I took on all forms of maybe I have to find the perfect outfit. I can't even tell you how many pairs of shoes I had. Clothes and dresses with tags on it of things that were never worn for the quest of finding the perfect outfit, for finding the perfect body, for having the perfect personality. I literally had taken it upon myself that it was me because it surely couldn't have been him. Clearly, it wasn't him. It was obviously something in me. So I've really unleashed a lot here, right? We're talking about a real life trauma happening in real time, taking me back to the memory of childhood trauma that had not been healed or recognized, to maladaptive coping mechanisms from food, body obsession, to, yeah, hiding. But here's the kicker: on the outside looking in, we looked like the perfect couple. Many, many, many of our friends were like, wow, you guys are so amazing together. And I really wish that I found a man like him. And his buddies would say, I really wish I had found a woman like her. Like, you guys are just so lucky. And I was really great at putting on the smiles, really great at putting on that everything was okay, really great at it, living this life of presenting to everybody that all is well and I'm fine and happy, when on the inside, the amount of death happening inside of me was very real. And year 3 turned into year 4. Year 4 turned into year 5. And at this point, we had been in completely um, separate bedrooms. He would kind of stay up all night working and kind of watching movies. And I would wake up really early to go to this school that I had co created and co founded. And I just knew that, this was the way that it was going to be. And I actually I think around year 4, year 5 is when I became afraid of my own body naked per se. And I'll take it back to the beginning of how I started this episode here of showering in the dark, is when everything shifted for me. Year 5 turned into year 6, but by year 6, something had shifted inside of me where I said, I can no longer live this way. The amount of unhappiness happening inside of me. My brother at this point was on his 3rd child, and I remember getting a phone call, sitting at a family dinner with my ex-husband's family, and getting a phone call from my brother and my sister-in-law telling me about my soon-to-be niece, their 3rd kiddo on the way. And I remember leaving that dinner to take the call, and I'm in the parking lot. My entire body shuts down, disassociation to the max. I'm hearing the words, and I'm literally like dying inside because nobody knows. Nobody knows the pain that I've been experiencing inside. Nobody knew the dynamic, not even a friend. There was a part of me that didn't feel safe to share anything. And so much of this is cultural, right? Like, you keep everything to yourself. You don't share things that are happening. Therapy is definitely not a thing in our culture. Our generation, thankfully, is changing that narrative. But you don't share anything, and you definitely don't put your partner on blast. You just don't do that in the culture. And I remember not even being able to respond. And my brother and my sister-in-law, I think they may have had a sense that something was off, but I was able to snap out of it in that moment and um, congratulate them and do all the things, right? Put that facade back on. I remember going back to the dinner, picking up the keys and telling my ex-husband, I need to go. And I left that dinner, and that was the first time that I started to take a stand for myself. And I could not pretend for another second in front of his family that I was okay. And I went home, and that began the journey of starting to recognize, no, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Like, how do you know, I've left out all of the ways that in that, 3, 4 months, I had really attempted suicide several times. Really willing to let my car just crash into a tree. Willing to let my car hit and like slam into the car in front of me. Reckless. And all of it really just to cry for help without knowing how to ask for help. And I started to have that conversation like, I'm not okay. I really need help. We need help. We need counseling. I'm not okay. And going back to the shower, it's very important, very pivotal moment in my life in particular. It was April of 2016. I'm showering in the dark. It's what I knew. I could brilliantly find my towel, my hairbrush, my clothes in pitch darkness. I had created such a skill set. And I'm coming out of the shower, and as I'm coming out of the shower in this pitch black room, my entire essence, my entire being becomes illuminated. And I'm illuminated in the mirror. So I'm forced to look at myself in the darkness, seeing light around me. And there was a whisper inside of me that said, it's time to go. After that, within a flash, I'm telling you, I saw my entire life flash in front of my eyes from childhood, my birth, up until that very moment in time. All of the traumas from sexual abuse to losing a house in the Northridge earthquake to joyous things as well, not all doom and gloom, to my teenage years, to college years, to my marriage. But more than that, there was like a computation, like a doot, 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 doot. Imagine AOL coming back online from back in the days, like a dial up. There was literally a dial up of all of these dots connecting, showing me not just the life that I've lived, but the impact of the life I've lived, the ways that all of these things had created fears and blocks and powerlessness and um, fear and just a lack of attachment, a lack of self, a lack of knowing what I was, what I wanted, who I am. And the voice came again. It's time to go. It was extremely quiet. Everything went back to being dark and in true dramatic fashion. And I have never done anything dramatic like this up until that point. And I picked up my keys and I picked up my wallet and I picked up my phone. I got myself dressed and I called my brother and said, I am taking a one-way ticket to San Francisco and I don't know when I'll be coming back to Dallas. And I took that step to say, it is time for me to become. And this is the story of my sexual liberation, but not just sexual liberation, the story of my liberation in general, freeing myself from a lifetime of intense trauma, freeing myself from the stories of culture, freeing myself from what the patriarchy or systems of culture has put upon me, freeing myself from inner and outer expectations, freeing myself from all of the things that no longer served me. And I went on an incredible transformative journey, taking me to study self-realization across the world with some of the most profound philosophers that you can imagine. I went to Thailand, Japan, all across India, studying the real art and the essence of yoga, which is not these physical postures, the essence of yoga, which is self-realization, freeing our mind from the suffering that we experience and create often for ourselves, as well as freeing ourselves from the suffering from our lived experiences. And something was quite missing, though this was a huge part of the journey, was to understand, and how do you find compassion, and how do you be with suffering, and how do you create identity and ego rooted in something bigger than us. Something was quite missing. I couldn't quite connect to my body. So I then realized, how do I connect to my body? And yoga was helpful. But I then found the Center for Trauma Embodiment, which at that point was called the Justice Resource Institute. And it was a incredibly impactful place for me to start to really understand what is the impact of trauma on a whole being. It's not just PTSD where you've got flashbacks and intrusions and night terrors and, hypervigilance. When you're talking about trauma in the context of a relationship with other human beings over a long period of time, it affects you holistically. your spiritual self, your mental self, your behavioral self, your physical health, all of the things, your attachment style, all of the things that get impacted and affected are beyond. And it impacts people completely differently. So it was there that I really got to see myself for the first time as someone who could identify as a human being who had experienced trauma. So that then took me into really practicing embodiment, embodiment of what is it like to be present. I had spent so many years developing a persona that had learned to not be present, to hide from my own body, to shove away my feelings, to really pretend that I didn't even exist. So the journey of embodiment was so vital and so important in learning how to heal from a lifetime of trauma. And I'm grateful. And today I still mentor I went on to become a mentor for the Center for Trauma Embodiment, where I now help other people, students learning this modality, trauma sensitive yoga. I continue to stay really connected to them in gratitude for what they gave to me, which was the ability to feel within my own body once again. So I took the piece of self-realization from the Eastern wisdom tradition, yoga, and I had the piece of embodiment from the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, and something was still missing. I was so afraid to explore sexually. I was afraid to attach to another human being, completely fearful to trust another person again, that they will really be honest and when they say that they love, what love means. And I knew that I was going to need to help myself in that. And I decided that I'm going to become a sex and relationship and intimacy coach. Now, at this time, I'd already started coaching people, but I was coaching more about the who am I and trauma recovery, missing this particular piece. So I had a coaching practice that I had built up just by helping myself and being very public and vocal about parts of my journey. And from there, I started to have a really huge interest in doing this work more deeply. And I found the Somatica Institute, one of the most renowned programs that there is for sex, relationship, intimacy coaching, and sexologists. And I went down the path of going through that program, going through the advanced training and doing some group leader work for them too now. And it was there that I really, really, really feel like it came full circle for me. Spirituality, embodiment, and intimacy, all of these things connecting. And it is my mission here to have sex and intimacy meet self-awareness, to help people really become awakened in multiple ways. Of course, sexually, but really, truthfully, the heart of me and the heart of my mission is to really help people become.